Mark Twain Selected Works. The Private History of a Campaign That Failed, Part 2, 1885. We occupied an old maple sugar camp whose half-rotted troughs were still propped against the trees. A long corn crib served for sleeping quarters for the battalion. On our left, half a mile away, were Mason's farm and house, and he was a friend to the cause. Shortly after noon, the farmers began to arrive from several different directions with mules and horses for our use, and these they lent us for as long as the war might last, which they judged might be about 3 months. The animals were of all sizes, all colors, and all breeds. They were mainly young and frisky, and nobody in the command could stay on them long at a time, for we were town boys and ignorant of horsemanship. The creature that fell to my share was a very small mule, and yet so quick and active he could throw me off without difficulty, and it did this whenever I got on. Then it would bray, stretching its neck out, laying its ears back, and spreading its jaws till you could see down to its works. If I took it by the bridle and tried to lead it off the grounds, it would sit down and brace back, and no one could ever budge it. However, I was not entirely destitute of military resources, and I did presently manage to spoil this game, for I had seen many a steamboat aground in my time, and knew a trick or two which even a grounded mule would be obliged to respect. There was a well by the corn crib, so I substituted 30 fathom of rope for the bridle and fetched him home with the windlass. I will anticipate here sufficiently to say that we did learn to ride after some days' practice, but never well. We could not learn to like our animals. They were not choice ones, and most of them had annoying peculiarities of one kind or another. Stephen's horse would carry him when he was not noticing under the huge excrescences which fall on the trunks of oak trees and wipe him out of the saddle this way. Stevens got several bad hurts. Sergeant Bower's horse was very large and tall, slim with long legs, and looked like a railroad bridge. His size enabled him to reach all about and as far as he wanted to go, so he was always biting Bower's legs. On the march, in the sun, Bower slept a good deal, and as soon as the horse recognized he was asleep, he would reach around and bite him on the leg. His legs were black and blue with bites. This was the only thing that could make him swear, but this always did. Whenever his horse bit him, he swore, and of course Stevens, who laughed at everything, laughed at this, and would get into such convulsions over it as to lose his balance and fall off his horse. And then Bowers, already irritated by the pain of the horse bite, would resent the laughter with hard language, and there would be a quarrel so that horse made no end of trouble and bad blood in the command. However, I will get back to where I was our first afternoon in the sugar camp. The sugar troughs came very handy as horse troughs, and we had plenty of corn to fill them with. I ordered Sergeant Bowers to feed my mule, but he said that if I reckoned he went to war to be a dry nurse to a mule, it wouldn't take me very long to find out my mistake. I believed that this was insubordination, but I was full of uncertainties about everything military, so I let the matter pass, and went and ordered Smith, the blacksmith's apprentice, to feed the mule. But he merely gave me a large, cold, sarcastic grin, such as an ostensibly 7-year-old horse gives you when you lift up his lip and find he is 14, and turned his back on me. I then went to the captain and asked if it were not right and proper and military for me to have an orderly. He said it was, but as there was only one orderly in the corps, it was but right he himself should have Bowers on his staff. Bowers said he wouldn't serve on anyone's staff, and if anybody thought he could make him, let him try. So, of course, the matter had to be dropped. There was no other way. Next, nobody would cook. It was considered a degradation, so we had no dinner. We lazed the rest of the pleasant afternoon away, some dozing under trees, some smoking cob pipes and talking sweethearts and war, others playing games. By late supper time, all hands were famished, and to meet the difficulty, all hands turned to on an equal footing and gathered wood, built fires, and cooked the evening meal. Afterward, everything was smooth for a while. Then trouble broke out between the corporal and the sergeant, each claiming to rank the other. Nobody knew which was the higher office, so Lyman had to settle the matter by making the rank of both officers equal. The commander of an ignorant crew like that has many troubles and vexations which probably do not occur in the regular army at all. However, with the song singing and yarns spinning around the campfire, everything presently became serene again, and by and by we raked the corn down one level and one end of the crib and all went to bed on it, tying a horse to the door so he would neigh if anyone tried to get in. It was always my impression that was always what the horse was there for, and I know it was the impression of at least one other of the command, for we talked about it at the time and admired the military ingenuity of the device. But when I was out west 3 years ago, I was told by Mr. A.J. Fuqua, a member of our company, that the horse was his, that the tying him at the door was a mere matter of forgetfulness, and that to attribute it to intelligent invention was to give him quite too much credit. In support of his position, he called my attention to the suggested fact that the artifice was not employed again. I had not thought of that before. We had some horsemanship drill every forenoon. Then afternoons we rode off here and there in squads a few miles and visited the farmers' girls and had a youthful good time and got an honest dinner or supper and then home again to camp, happy and content. For a time, life was idly delicious. It was perfect. There was no war to mar it. Then came some farmers with an alarm one day. They said it was rumored that the enemy were advancing in our direction from over Hyde's Prairie. The result was a sharp stir among us and general consternation. It was a rude awakening from our pleasant trance. The rumor was but a rumor, nothing definite about it, so in the confusion we did not know which way to retreat. Lyman was not for retreating at all in these uncertain circumstances, but he found that if he tried to maintain that attitude he would fare badly, for the command were in no humor to put up with insubordination. So he yielded the point and called a council of war to consist of himself and 3 other officers. But the privates made such a fuss about being left out, we had to allow them to remain. Well, they were already present and doing most of the talking, too. The question was, which way to retreat? But all were so flurried that nobody even seemed to have even a guess to offer, except Lyman. He explained in a few calm words that inasmuch as the enemy were approaching from over Hyde's Prairie, our course was simple. All we had to do was not retreat toward him. Another direction would suit our purposes perfectly. Everybody saw in a moment how true this was and how wise, so Lyman got a great many compliments. It was now decided that we should fall back on Mason's farm. It was after dark by this time, and as we could not know how soon the enemy might arrive, it did not seem best to try to take the horses and things with us, so we only took the guns and ammunition and started at once. The route was very rough and hilly and rocky, and presently the night grew very black and rain began to fall, so we had a troublesome time of it, struggling and stumbling along in the dark, and soon some person slipped and fell, and then the next person behind stumbled over him and fell, and so did the rest, one after the other. And then Bowers came along with the keg of powder in his arms, while the command were all mixed together, arms and legs on the muddy slope. And so he fell, of course, with the keg, and this started the whole detachment down the hill in a body, and they landed in a brook at the bottom in a pile, and each that was undermost was pulling the hair, scratching and biting those that were on top of him, and those that were being scratched and bitten, scratching and biting the rest in their turn, and all saying they would die before they would ever go to war again if they ever got out of this brook this time, and the invader might rot for all they cared, and the country along with him. And all such talk as that, which was dismal to hear and take part in such smothered, low voices, in such a grisly, dark place, and so wet, and the enemy, maybe, coming along at any moment. The keg of powder was lost, and the guns, too. So the growling and complaining continued straight along, while the brigade pawed around the pasty hillside and slopped around in the brook hunting for these things. Consequently, we lost considerable time at this, and then we heard a sound, and held our breath and listened, and it seemed to be the enemy coming. Oh, it could have been a cow, for it had a cough like a cow. But we did not wait, but left a couple of guns behind and struck out for Mason's again as briskly as we could scramble along in the dark. But we got lost presently in among the rugged little ravines and wasted a deal of time finding the way again. So it was after 9 when we reached Mason's stile at last, and then, before we could open our mouths to give the countersign, several dogs came bounding over the fence with a great riot and noise, and each of them took a soldier by the slack of his trousers and began to back away with him. We could not shoot the dogs without endangering the persons they were attached to, so we had to look on helpless at what was perhaps the most mortifying spectacle of the Civil War. There was light enough and to spare, for the Masons had now run out on the porch with candles in their hands. The old man and his son came and undid the dogs without difficulty, all but Bowers's. But they couldn't undo his dog. They didn't know his combination. He was of the bull kind and seemed to be set with the Yale time lock. But they got him loose at last with some scalding water, of which Bowers got his share and returned thanks. Peterson Dunlap afterwards made up a fine name for this engagement and also for the night march, which preceded it, but both have long ago faded out of my memory. We now went into the house, and they began to ask us a whirl of questions, whereby it presently came out that we did not know anything concerning who or what we were running from. So the old gentleman made himself very frank and said we were a curious breed of soldiers, and guessed we could be depended on to end up the war in time because the governor could not afford the expense of the shoe leather we should cost of trying to follow us around. Marion Ranger's good name, b'gosh, said he, and wanted to know why we hadn't a picket guard at the place where the road entered the prairie, and why we hadn't sent out a scouting party to spy out the enemy and bring us an account of his strength and so on, before jumping up and stampeding out of a strong position upon a mere vague rumor, and so on and so forth, till he made us all feel shabbier than the dogs had done, not so half enthusiastically welcome. So we went to bed shamed and low-spirited, except Stevens. Soon Stevens began to devise a garment for Bowers which could be made to automatically display his battle scars to the grateful, or conceal them from the envious, according to his occasions. But Bowers was in no humor for this, so there was a fight, and when it was over, Stevens had some battle scars of his own to think about. Then we got a little sleep, but after all we had gone through, our activities were not over for the night. For about 2 o'clock in the morning, we heard a shout of warning from down the lane, accompanied by a chorus from all the dogs, and in a moment, everybody was up and flying around to find out what the alarm was about. The alarmist was a horseman who gave notice that a detachment of Union soldiers was on its way from Hannibal with orders to capture and hang any bands like ours which he could find. Farmer Mason was in a flurry this time himself. He hurried us out of the house with all haste and sent one of his negroes with us to show us where to hide ourselves and our telltale guns among the ravines half a mile away. It was raining heavily. We struck down the lane and across some rocky pasture land which offered good advantages for stumbling. Consequently, we were down in the mud most of the time, and every time a man went down, he blackguarded the war and everybody connected with it and gave himself the master dose of all for being so foolish as to go into it. At last we reached the wooded mouth of a ravine, and there we huddled ourselves under the streaming trees and sent the Negro back home. It was a dismal and heartbreaking time. We were like to be drowned with the rain, deafened with the howling wind and the booming thunder, and blinded by the lightning. It was indeed a wild night. The drenching we were getting was misery enough, but a deeper misery still was the reflection that the halter might end us before we were a day older. A death of this shameful sort had not occurred to us as being among the possibilities of war. It took the romance all out of the campaign and turned our dreams of glory into a repulsive nightmare. As for doubting that so barbarous an order had been given, Not one of us did that.